Hello, podcast listener. Today's episode of JJ Meets World features CJ Schnase, the proprietor of Replay Games. We're going to scratch the itch you have for that up, down, left, right, A, B, select, start. Plus, we're going to talk about Chinese buffet, so you're going to be hungry and nostalgic for working with your thumbs. All of this and more on today's episode of JJ Meets World, but first, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of JJ Meets World is brought to you by Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. Natalie has a proven track record to get your home sold faster and for more money. She is consistently focused on her clients' needs and wants throughout the entire process and make sure that they are well taken care of. If you're looking to buy or sell, reach out to Natalie today. On average, Natalie sells a home every 3.74 days. That's at least 2 a week. And last year, Natalie earned her clients on average over $4,000 above list price on their homes. And you don't have to take our word for it. Here's some of the great reviews Natalie has received. I was overwhelmingly impressed with Natalie and all the Hatch team. She was very responsive and responded to all of the emails within an hour. She gave great advice and encouragement from the listing and pictures, the offer, and all the closing details. The marketing team knew exactly how to promote my property, and I was pleased by how soon and easily my property received an offer. I was actually dreading selling my condo, and Natalie did such an awesome job that I felt like I really didn't need to do anything. The thing I most appreciated was that she really listened to what I wanted to do and respected my decisions. I would definitely recommend Natalie and all the Hatch Realty team. They made this process so wonderful. That was from Diane. So listen, if you're in the mood to buy or sell a home, give Natalie a call right now. You can reach her at 701-388-9338. Natalie, Natalie, at hatchrealtyfm.com, or you can go to livefargomorehead.com. That's livefargomorehead.com and find out some information. Huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
A couple of weeks ago, the local Chinese buffet that's right next to our studio that Tucker and I have frequented after recordings of JJ Meets World came under some really unfortunate media attention because they had pigeons in the basement. And you can draw your own conclusion. They weren't serving pigeons, but you can go online and read a bunch of this stuff.
Literally one tiny cage with like 4 or 5 pigeons in it.
And it didn't appear that they had been there for a long time. There was no thought that they were cooking them and serving them to patrons. But people stopped going to this place in droves.
Yep.
Because that was the thing. It's not King House, it's Pigeon House.
Right.
And
it's a hard bell to unring.
It really is. And so it got this unfortunate reputation for no reason.
Right.
And our guest today, CJ Schnase, was the first guy I saw who took a real public stance of saying, hey guys, if you don't think that this place served pigeons, you should not forget about it as a place to eat. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people in our community who are rah-rah for downtown, and they were silent about this. This is a business that's been around for decades. Yep. And let's face it, bad press like that is a business killer.
There are big business interests that are buying up properties in this area, and they have not, from as far as I can tell from an outsider's perspective, have not been very kind to any anchor tenants that have been in downtown. And it makes it really, really difficult for businesses that have been here for a long time that have stuck it with it in downtown through thick and thin. And King House, I don't remember a time when we didn't have King House buffet, and they're my favorite Chinese buffet.
So,
I will be damned if some media hype storm about a tiny cage of pigeons that weren't being eaten and were nowhere near food is going to stop me from going and getting my lemon chicken.
Good move.
No one's going to stop me from doing that.
So Our guest today organizes an online Facebook event called Save the King House. And so what he was saying is if you like the King House and if this has been a part of your childhood, or maybe you just haven't been here in a while, let's help infuse them with some cash right now because they're seeing a huge percentage in decline for dinners and lunches. So he picked a Monday, said show up at 6:00. All of a sudden, 6:00 rolls around. I drove by. The line was all the way down the block. It was this grassroots effort to just remind people and say like, hey, listen, I wrote a blog on it for my regular job, and that blog went viral. It had over 30,000 clicks on it, which was good for me. 30,000 clicks is good for this guy right here. And it was called Viva El King House. And I kind of made the case of, listen, you can't save every business, and not all businesses deserve to be saved. But I do feel like this one was unjustly turned into clickbait.
Yeah. Out of my own opinion, based on my own opinion, I would be comfortable calling this a slander campaign.
I would too.
Yeah.
I would. Booyah. High five on that one.
High five on
I like
that one
that.
if you could hear it.
So CJ was, and I've known CJ for a while. We used to work together back in the day, but this really brought him back to the forefront for me. And I've been following him on social media because he's got an amazing business in downtown Fargo that we get to talk about that plays into my nostalgia. His business is a bring your own Doritos and Mountain Dew. If you're like me, you also want a small cheese pizza from Domino's, and you are going to walk right back into your childhood. The conversation today talks about video games, the video game industry, heck, even video game technology. You guys throw around some very deep dive stuff when it comes to the type of television you're looking on.
This one scratched my nerd itch a lot. And
Big time.
And you know what CJ, I think, is a really good example of is a new downtown business standing up for an old downtown business. So his business is downtown, and he said, I see what's happening here, and I want to make sure that my neighbors, in this area are going to be protected, because who knows, maybe someone decides to try to make it look like I'm feeding my video game patrons with,
with Bowser meat. Was there ever an episode of Matlock where a young lawyer came to Matlock's defense when Matlock was unfairly? Because if so, this is the episode for it. So, folks, I think you're really going to get a kick out of this episode. And if it gets too nerdy for you, let me remind you, these are the conversations that had to take place so that you could play Mario Brothers in your own home. So respect the process. Sit back, relax. This episode of JJ Meets World, produced in the heart of downtown Fargo, just a few doors down from the King House Chinese Buffet.
JJ Meets World.
CJ, welcome to JJ Meets World.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show today, not only because we've got a background that's, over a decade deep now?
At least, and then we're both Fargo peeps, so.
Yeah. But, and you're a North kid too, so you're like Tucker.
So, yes.
So it all kind of swirls together. But what we want to talk about today is we want to talk about your passion for video games.
There's a lot of it.
There really is.
Yes.
So much so that you've actually created a business.
Yes.
A very unique business model where your love of video games can spill out to other people. And what I love the most about Replay Games here in Fargo is watching younger kids pick up games that are older than they are.
Yes, and it's hilarious because we'll watch kids that they'll play Fortnite, and that's the big hot one, right? They're flying on the controllers and they're doing a million actions a second, it seems like. And I'll put them in front of Super Mario Bros. For the regular Nintendo, and you have two buttons and then up, down, left, right, and they have no idea what to do.
Yeah, they're like, what if I need to strafe?
Yeah. And it's like, what do I do? It's like, well, you just start pushing buttons and figure it out, right? It's like, how did you figure out how to play Fortnite?
You might as well hand them a rotary phone.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, what? So, yeah.
So where's your passion for video games come from?
Well, it's one of those things that I've always played video games. As young as I can remember holding a controller, and specifically I started with the Atari 2600 playing with my cousins. It was literally my uncle's Atari that is the same unit that sits in our store right now. So
really?
I started playing that with my cousins growing up, and one of my all-time favorite games is Warlords. And it's, I don't know if you ever played like Brick Attack, Super Breakout, where you had the bricks at the top of the screen and you're bouncing a ball off a paddle. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty classic Atari trope game. But Warlords took that idea. Instead, you have 4 kings in each corner with the wall of bricks protecting your kings. And you play that same thing, only your paddle is trying to get the ball to take out the other kings. So you break down
nice.
their walls and then you take out the king. So one of my all-time favorite Atari games.
You know, people I think look at those old games and think, well, they're so simplistic.
Yeah.
But really, they are some of the hardest games to get in there because you've got it's very segmented and you need to be able to figure out like some matter of angles, I imagine, in this. You know, when I watch people play Pong, you think it should be really easy to play Pong, but it's not. There are differences and there are changes. And I think about the game Donkey Kong. That is one of the hardest games I have ever played in my entire life. So when I watch the King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, I think to myself, these guys have got some real skill, real talent.
Who was it? Billy Mitchell that just got dethroned for his high score. So
Turns out Billy Mitchell's a piece of shit human being.
It wasn't just him. A lot of people actually got dethroned hardcore.
And it's, you know, it's one thing like I argue with a lot of people like, you know, there's no telling that he got the score. Just the way he got the score, what he was playing on was not correct. But it's funny that to prove him wrong, like a guy's watching a VHS tape of this recording and he's able to like split it down to the frames and be like, okay, the way that the screen refreshed the information on the screen, like it went in quadrants around the screen or whatever. So, you know, kind of counterclockwise or clockwise, whatever. And that showed that it was not the type of equipment he was playing on because the way that the true equipment played on went like top to down or something like that.
So yeah, let's break this down even a little bit more.
Yeah.
So for those of you who aren't aware, and you can just Google Billy Mitchell and maybe even Hot Sauce or USA and you'll find
I've always
him.
wanted to try his Ricky's Hot Sauce.
Right. But essentially he submitted a VHS tape of him playing Donkey Kong and they proved that it wasn't on the original motherboard of the actual arcade itself. He was using an emulator. And the issue is that though we can't prove that he cheated within that emulator, the very fact that he used an emulator puts a shadow over everything, which is why that's not a legit way to submit your score because it's easily edited and made to look however you want. So that was the thing that he got caught on. And then it just sort of cascaded into the sort of the, essentially the old boys club of Twin Galaxies and a lot of the players that surrounded it who were a lot of these young gamers as kids that were the first to be written about basically.
Yeah,
as
Life
gamers.
magazine did a
Right.
big cover story on them.
Right. And for whatever weird Machiavellian reason, they felt they had to maintain their titles no matter what. And so there's a lot of light being shown in that right now. We could do a whole podcast just on that.
If you want to see a movie that it just really shows you what the world of gaming can be like, The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters is one of the best documentaries that turns out to just be about like good versus evil that I have ever seen. I love that movie so much.
And I want to say it was like maybe 10 years. What year did that movie come out? 05?
No, it was. I think it was close to like 08, 09 because we were working at the Fargo Theater at the time.
That's right. So it must have been the 5th year anniversary of it. I believe was around the time that Billy Mitchell was going for the record again. And my buddy James Larson got hired as I think it's just a camera guy because the producers of the film wanted to get everyone together for Billy trying to go for this new high score. And so they got everyone together. But what's the guy's name? Captain Awesome? Mr. Awesome?
Yep. I think it's Captain Awesome, right?
Captain Awesome. James told me that Captain Awesome got kicked out by Billy Mitchell because he brought like a bronze plaque for Billy, awarding him the biggest douche in the universe award.
That's awesome.
And Billy, since it was sort of Billy's event that was going on, he was able to.
Right.
So that's the word that I heard from my buddy in Detroit who ended up working on that.
Well, it's funny too, because like you said, we could talk about stuff like this for hours. I mean, there's now we're going into like 40 plus years of home console history now too, because the Atari 2600 came out in 77 of like September, November, somewhere in there. So.
You know what this makes me think of actually, and this is something I've wanted to talk about recently. So when I do play video games at home, it's usually my old consoles. It's usually my childhood games that I'm playing. And so more often than not, it's Sonic 2.
Yeah.
And
Sonic Tuesday.
Oh yeah. So Sonic 2, there's a point scoring system, right? There's top right corner, top left corner. You get higher points.
Collect rings and all that.
It seems to have next to no impact on the game itself, besides getting like those chaos diamonds or whatever. But I realized that so many old games have this sort of point system up in the corner. Mario's got it. A bunch of them, the other ones do. And I have to assume that that's just a carryover from the arcade days, right?
Yeah, I mean, they would have reused a lot of those engines and stuff like that to port it and then, minimize what they could to their goal was to make it look as close as possible. And then the trick was those CPUs and stuff like that didn't have the same power as the arcade machines because they're condensing the full upright cabinet. I mean, obviously not the whole cabinet's the computer, but they're condensing that down to a home console bit version. So like, is it Double Dragon 1 is just completely like unplayable on the NES because it's one player only. It's called Double Dragon, right? Yeah. So you compare that one to the arcade game. It's very different. It's also really fascinating because Nintendo had such a strong grasp of the market in the 90s that if a developer wanted to develop something for the Genesis, Nintendo would drop them all support completely. Like they would get just completely red shafted. Excuse me. And, so yeah, there's like 3 or 4 different versions of the game Alien 3 because
Really?
Master System, Genesis, Super Nintendo, and regular Nintendo, they all play differently basically. So,
Oh man.
Yeah.
I find it to be so interesting, when we get into the console wars. I was always a Nintendo guy. I was always a Nintendo guy. And then when Grand Theft Auto 3, I believe, came out on the PS2, I moved over to the PS2 because it was the first time I said, like, this replaces 2 things in my media cabinet.
Sure.
I can watch my DVDs on it.
Yep.
And I can play games on it. And that's when Nintendo was still like, no, we are not going to make something with discs. We still love cartridges and we're going to make these little tiny mini discs.
Right.
And so they lost me at the GameCube.
Sure.
More or less.
And there's a lot of fascinating stuff about that technology. Like the VR episode you were talking about, the Blu-ray versus HD DVD, and how that was like a really big contention between those two. And then Blu-ray, here we are.
I guess gaming consoles are one of the few media wars that were not decided by pornography.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it really
that really had no impact whatsoever.
And it shows that there are adult games out there you can find, even made for consoles, but nobody wants to carry them. Walmart won't carry them, right? And so there's a reason for that. They do sell, but they don't sell well enough that everybody's doing it, right? But yeah, and so you talk about like Nintendo controlling 95% of a $5 billion market back in the day. And so then Genesis comes in and Sega does what Nintendo don't kind of thing. So they're trying to look cool. Nintendo is very strict about blood in games. And so like the first Mortal Kombat, it looks like everybody's sweating or other bodily fluids. And so you get to Genesis that's got blood and all the fatalities and stuff like that. And then you get into like you were talking about the GameCube stuff, and I had a guy call me the other day. He's like, "So I just found this GameCube movie. I'm wondering what it's worth." And I was like, "Well, it's not a movie. They actually did make mini DVDs. That was an actual format. And it's actually really popular in Japan. Still to this day, you can find new music albums being released on those mini discs, which is really interesting. But yeah, and then you get into today's market where everybody's like, "What is the console war?" Because it's always Sony and Microsoft now,
right.
Xbox, PlayStation. Now it's like, Nintendo's always been there. They're not going anywhere kind of thing. And so the general statistic is that most people choose Sony or Microsoft, and then they always get the Nintendo product because Nintendo's always got those IPs that are exclusive to them that nobody can emulate or try to even copy really well. So...
Well, the Nintendo Switch was, I think, a game changer.
Yes.
I mean, the Nintendo Wii was a game changer too. That idea of you're going to get up and you
are the controller, but that's Microsoft. So
I also really appreciate this from Nintendo on the Wii when it was like, hey, you've been playing for a while. Maybe you should go outside.
Yep.
I mean,
don't
it's like
judge
that's
me.
like KFC being, I think you've had enough to eat. I think you're full. Okay, so let's dial this back a little bit. So how long has Replay Games been around? I followed like the building of it on social media, but when was your opening?
So our physical store opening date was May 1st. I started working on the idea back in 2016, just kind of working on the business plan portion of it. I started a little bit before November 2016, just getting some social media stuff built. But then throughout the year 2017, we were trying to get funding going, which is always a fun job for any business. And so we spent most of the year, and then finally Gate City Bank was able to set us up with a loan through the Bank of North Dakota for a beginning entrepreneurship grant, which is great. And so we finally signed those papers end of 2017, December, and then got all the leasing, all that stuff, all that fun legal stuff taken care of so we could have a space and then move into the space and buy all the product and stuff like that.
So what does it feel like when someone walks into Replay Games?
Well, it's funny to watch new people coming into that store because there's a lot of people that their mouths are just hanging open. Whatever it was that they're expecting, this was not it, which is awesome. You know, they're expecting video games of something, right? They're kind of looking for another used pawn kind of retail shop situation. But what you see when you walk in is a massive amount of TVs ready to play games. We got 24 stations with 40 some systems ready to go. We got Game Boys, PSPs, the handheld stuff. And so it's just fun to watch a person's first time experience coming in where it's like, okay, clearly these guys are about video games. They're not just selling games, but we want to also share in that playing of video games too. So
you seem to be following a lot, almost like a similar model that Paradox Comics has, where they've got comic books there. It's a comic book store, but for longevity's sake, they've created sort of a culture around that place. Yeah. People go there, play games, they hang out, they talk about comics. It's sort of an environment for them to be.
Exactly. And it was one of those things like, speaking of our Take-Two video days and stuff like that, and going back to like Blockbuster Video when I started there, which tells you how old I am too, but going to Blockbuster, they used to have a kiosk with a 64 and Pokemon Snap ready to go. And it was on like a 5-minute, 10-minute reset timer. And my brother and I would have like mini tournaments, seeing who could get further in that reset timer. And so it was like, I was envisioned a place like Rock 30 or Electric Underground where you're getting these buying, selling games, but also we wanted to have a space for playing games and meeting people. After high school and college, it's hard to meet people that live near you, especially because then we're in the digital age where everything's online, so we want to create a space that people can go to. We get a lot of praise for being downtown and kid friendly. There's not a lot of these kind of venues downtown that kids can go, so we're very against getting any kind of liquor license or whatever. One, I don't want the headache of dealing with it, but then two, the costs associated, and three, that's just not what we're about. So
you're young enough to be a part of video game fever when it first came out.
Yep.
But I don't feel like you're old enough to be part of the generation that serviced those machines when they were out. Like if it broke, you'd have to bring it down to Gene's TV Clinic, which I think was the only like Nintendo certified service agent.
Certified, yeah. So and I remember they fixed 2 of my GameCubes. So
see, there you go.
Yeah.
What's the reality of working with media that's 30 plus years old? I mean, do the cartridges deteriorate at all?
Yes and no. So like you said, I wasn't in the generation that would have been working on the arcade cabs kind of thing, but from this passion, I'm pretty good with the soldering iron kind of thing. I can work with the multimeter and kind of figure out, okay, this capacitor is blown kind of stuff. And so with video games, the cartridges, they're really durable, especially compared to disc media, because once you scratch a disc, you can resurface it, but eventually you're going to destroy data. With cartridges, as long as the chip integrity is good, it'll stay for the test of time kind of thing. I
would assume that with cartridges, the biggest issue would be battery death. So
battery death for saves is the big one. And that's really simple to fix. And I just posted a video on our Facebook because I had a customer brought in a Pokemon game that the battery, he had paid another company that to replace it in town here, and he's like, yeah, I paid them, they said that it was fixed, it never worked. It still played the game, it just wouldn't save, right? So I opened it up, and like these button cell batteries that are like a large watch battery, they have solder tabs that are pressed onto them so they don't come off easily, right? They're meant to adhere to those button cell batteries. Well, I opened it up and I was like, what is going on here? There's tape inside here. So basically the technician had pulled the tabs off of the previous battery, stuck a regular computer battery into there and taped it together and called it good. And it's like, maybe he tested it and it worked. As long as you don't like turn off the console, it'll save your information. But as soon as you actually turn it off, it loses it. So I just looked at this and was like, wow, I was really irate because this kid paid somebody to fix it for them. They said it was fixed and then charged it for him, and so I was like, it's going to be another $7 for me to do it for my time and the cost of the part. But, it's not hard. I posted the video of how I did the repair and showed like, this is not what you want to do with the business kind of thing. So I felt bad for the kid, but I was glad I was able to fix it for him. So
That's good.
You probably got a lifelong customer out of that.
Right.
kid.
Well, and then the same customer was hilarious too, because he had come in a few times last year, and then throughout the school year, he just never made it back in. And so he came back in a couple months ago, and I was like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" And I name dropped him right away, and he was really surprised that I remembered his name. And that's one of the things that I kind of discovered through this business, is that I'm just one of those people that I can remember faces and names. So.
Okay, let's talk about your favorite video games of all time. And I know that that's like saying
I like you said it that way versus what is your favorite game? Because there's no favorite game. I have a list of the games I enjoy, right?
Right.
Like what's on your Mount Rushmore, but you don't have to pick only 4.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of my all-time favorite games is called Phantasy Star 4 for the Genesis. And so 4, it's part of a series already. What's really cool about this series, there's 2 interesting facts about it, is that Phantasy Star 3 we don't talk about. They totally red card that game.
You can play 4 without playing 1, 2, 3 and be able to play the game.
Exactly. And the really cool thing, if you do play 1, 2, and 4, skipping 3, is that the stories take place 1,000 years from each other. And so what you do going through the story in the second game, what you did in the first game was lore in the second game, and then vice versa with the fourth game. And so they talk about this, it says on the back of the box, so it's not really a spoiler alert, but a planet exploded kind of thing. And really cool how that explosion affected the entire story and lore and mythology of this world that they created, or universe rather, because it's sci-fi, but it's just really fantastic series and storytelling. And then they closed it off really nicely as well, which is also bittersweet, because then that means that they can't really write more into it, right? So, it's one of my all-time. I do a lot of JRPGs just because they're going to be heavily story influenced. So Breath of Fire 3 is another one of my favorites series, PlayStation 1 there, and really kind of a cool. I don't know if you want to call it like Fall of the Roman Empire, where you're part of the Dragon Clan and then they're hunted to extinction for their power, basically. And then your character is one of the last remaining dragons out there. And during the story, you actually come across one of the guardians who was tasked to killing and genociding these dragons. And so it's kind of cool how their relationship plays out. Another one of my favorite series would be, I play a lot of Final Fantasy games. I just recently replayed the first Final Fantasy game, and I specifically played that one on the regular Nintendo. What was cool about that was the regular Nintendo one is god-awful difficult. There's a lot of quality of life things that they've changed over the years that, for instance, if an enemy dies, but there's enemies remaining, if your party still has attacks left that they're going to do for that turn, they'll automatically target a new enemy. In the NES version, they'll just attack the corpse, basically. So you had to really always be paying attention with those fights, which I really enjoyed. And it was funny because I was wanting to play the first one again, but I was looking online, like, what's the best version? Because they've re-released this game a few times. And a lot of people say, play the Game Boy Advance version. It's got the best. There's extra content and stuff like that in there. However, I got my feet wet with the NES version. Then I tried to play the Game Boy Advance and it was way too easy. I didn't like it. So I went back and beat the first game again on the regular Nintendo. So
anything in the more modern version that tickles your fancy?
So slightly modern. I'm working my way there. I really want to play the Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is the Greek-based Assassin's Creed game. And my background's in game development, which we can talk about later if you're interested.
No.
So my developer brain's like, okay, if you want to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you have to earn that right. So I'm going back and I played the first Assassin's Creed game, and I've tried to play this game a half dozen times over the last 10, 12 years. And one of the things that really broke me with this game is I was expecting it to be stuck in that historical setting, but it was more of a sci-fi story because you're using future technology to go into your ancestral genes to get these memories, basically. And as soon as you get pulled out of that historical setting, it just totally cut me off with the story there, and I was not interested in that. Not to mention, when they pull you out, the futuristic part of the story is really lame and boring and just badly paced. So I finally sucked it up and forced myself through the first game. And I'm glad I did, because I'm now into the second game, and just having that kind of nostalgia from the first game going into the second game already, that it's like, oh, wow, I really like how they improved these things. They took what they had from that first game and just made it better all the way around, kind of thing.
My favorite stand-up arcade, like a cabinet game, is Burger Time.
Sure.
And I'm still really good at it. I go to Uptown Minneapolis, and they have a nice one. I mean, they definitely care for their machines down there, which is evident in the fact that you don't get sticky buttons, and Up Down actually works the way it is.
Yep.
But then when I got into the Nintendo world, I know. So I remember the first game that I beat and I feel like I mastered was DuckTales.
Sure.
And I still to this day feel like I've mastered DuckTales. And I'm lucky because enough people had a passion for that game that they re-released, like they did a new version of it and they updated the graphics.
Wii U?
I played mine on the PS4.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on.
So I mean, they ported it over to that, but they even hired a guy to come in and redo the music for it.
Yep.
So it wasn't the 8-bit style music. So he just essentially took all this stuff and said, okay, we have all these new modern tools that are, and I bought the album. I actually bought the album for it, which is great.
DuckTales.
Woo! In fact, for a while it was my ringtone because, and we don't need to get into that. When I got to the Super Nintendo, the one game I love, but I've never beaten is Sunset Riders.
Oh, sure.
I can get all the way to Sir Richard Rose at the end.
Yeah.
But there's too many bullets. There's too many bullets. I can't beat it. Doesn't matter what character I am going in with everything I've got.
Yeah.
Can't get past it. But Turtles in Time, I've mastered
Love that game, yep.
When they re-released that in like some
The
new
reshelled
version,
one.
like I hated it.
It's terrible. Yeah.
Oh, thank
Yes.
God. Thank God. And as things progressed, I really don't have a lot of games that I follow through on the entire franchise. Like I liked Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3, but I haven't played any of the Game Boy Advance ones. So I know I'm missing a huge amount of storyline because when I was playing 3, I was like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
Who's Organization 13? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
But the one game that I feel has hit the mark for being almost more cinematic than most movies is Red Dead Redemption.
Sure.
That, not Red Dead Revolver, which I enjoyed as a game, but not a ton, but Red Dead Redemption, the storyline, the visuals. Whenever I'm watching a Western movie, I just watched True Grit the other day.
That's one of my favorite ones. Yeah.
True Grit?
John Wayne. So,
exactly, right?
Yeah.
So I'm watching True Grit and I'm like, God, I really would kind of like to put in Red Dead Redemption right now and play that.
Yeah.
We're at such an interesting point where, a good video game is going to be turned into a movie.
Yeah.
And movies nowadays still make a video game version if they're popular enough, they think, with a younger
They're
generation.
usually terrible. So
They are. No one gets it right. Disney for a little while had a
the
good
old
thing
games
going.
are great.
Yeah,
with like old Aladdin and stuff. So,
Yeah.
But
But
both
the
games,
modern
like
stuff.
they because they did Aladdin Genesis and Aladdin Super Nintendo, and they're totally different games.
Yeah.
Oh,
because
really?
Capcom made the Super Nintendo one, and Disney Animation Studios worked with a developer for, I think it was Virgin Mobile or something like that. What became Virgin Mobile, Virgin Games back, and then did the Genesis version. And so like the Genesis version looks more like the movie did as far as because they had the animation team from Disney working on it. So
Oh, interesting.
That's one of the games I've mastered.
Yeah.
is Aladdin Sega Genesis.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's that
would be on
game's
my Mount
really
Rushmore
interesting
for
just
sure.
because like if you started with the Genesis version, you hate the Super Nintendo version generally. Like that's and then vice versa, right? But yeah, and then Red Dead Redemption 2 and you got these games that are just huge blockbuster titles, right? The new God of War was amazing. Marvel Spider-Man just became the #1 best-selling superhero game. So that's the PS4 exclusive.
I've watched the videos on YouTube of going to the highest point you possibly can and then jumping off and like watching and saying like they have it so you've got 9.5 seconds of
Yes.
actual like visuals as you're falling down this thing. It's like that is crazy.
Yes. Yeah, so it's really cool what they're doing. And then, I mean, with like the Notre Dame Cathedral burning down, that they're using parts of Assassin's Creed games to rebuild it because when they were developing that game, they actually sent artists there and they did tons of sketches and stuff like that of the building. So they're using parts of the game to actually rebuild this cathedral. So
It's pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah.
Video games get a bad rap whenever a horrible tragedy happens.
and they're very quick to point to those big ones like Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate because there's so much good stuff that comes from video games, like we just mentioned. And, then you talk about like you can get to the community around it too with like Extra Life or Games Done Quick, where they're raising millions of dollars for charities, for even our local hospitals kind of stuff. So it's crazy to see.
Extra Life, if you've never heard of that, it's very unique. Their goal is to put video game consoles in hospitals so that children can get a chance to play that. You know, you spend a lot of time if you're a child who has a disease like cancer. And so using Extra Life as a way to say, I'm going to spread my love of video games and help put an Xbox here or get a PS4 in somewhere. I was very lucky to be a part of that last year, and I had a wonderful time. I won a celebrity Monopoly tournament as part of it. No big deal. Gotta get the reds and the oranges. That's where the money's at. And there are some things where, I mean, what do you think is the worst game of all time? Like
just because it was bad or like bad influence or
no, because like it was like overhyped or the gameplay is bad. You know, of course, some people are going to say, well, E.T.
Yeah, E.T. is always the scapegoat because, I mean, it was during the dawn of time where we're leading up to the video game crash. And it's like, I don't know, if people point at E.T., it's like, well, have you ever played Pac-Man on the Atari? Because it is horrendous.
I feel like you just shouldn't even count Atari games at that point.
Right,
like it's in such an infancy at that point.
Wasn't there a game called Pitfall, like no one could beat? Like
you don't beat it. It's a lot of those Atari games didn't have an end. It was just get as high of a score as you possibly could.
Yeah. And it's actually funny, as Pitfall did have an ending. Your goal was to collect all the treasure in the game, and there's a way to do that. But most people just either got bored or they lost their lives, right?
Okay.
But yeah, and then they even made a sequel to that game, Pitfall 2, for the Atari as well, which featured even more ridiculous levels and stuff like that. But yeah, a lot of those games, because they're so difficult, they just for years were like, there's no end screen for this game. But then some of them, you know, if there wasn't, they didn't do an end screen, they just looped back to the beginning of the game. And so you just play the game over and over again, basically. So.
Let's pretend that I am a writer for a video game magazine and Pitfall 2 comes out. My review would be, Pitfall is pitiful. I feel like it's just waiting for it, right? You know?
Yeah. But yeah, no, E.T. is definitely one of those big ones that was, there's a lot of hype around it because the movie was so successful. But what was, you know, you had to look at it in the context of the time too, in that the programmer, I mean, these were one guy's working on this game kind of thing back in those days. And so the programmer had 3 months to make and release this game. So he's got to prototype it, you know, design, prototype, and then deliver. And so he was really proud of what he got accomplished, but because of how much hate it received, and then with everything else, the saturation of the market at the time, that led into the crash of the 80s with the video game crash. And then, it's actually interesting, you know, looking at the game release dates and stuff like that there were still games being released. It just wasn't as common or fast, I should say. And then in 1985, NES comes out and boom, Mario is like, holy cow, we're back kind of thing. And Nintendo just exploded out of the water with the Nintendo. So,
well, Nintendo did a smart thing where they said, listen, we're not going to limit ourselves to just, you know, an arcade or just a home system. You know, they started putting out all these extra things around them, you know, like Nintendo Power Magazine. You had a merchandising was crazy.
There was a hotline you could call for tips and tricks. So
I called that when I was a kid.
Was it once you saw the movie The Wizard and you went, there's what? And then you called after that?
No, but like even figuring out ways to put themselves into things like the movie The Wizard was brilliant. You know, Nintendo was pretty smart back in the day about what they're going to do. Then, of course, they made the Super Mario Brothers movie, and that was disaster for all involved.
I love that movie.
So
like,
does Tucker.
It's so
it's a guilty
bad,
pleasure.
Good. Exactly. Yeah, I will play it at the store a few times a year.
When they make the Koopas dance in the elevator, I laugh every time. I really, really do.
And did you like the throwback later? They're like, where are the Koopas? Like, they're all dancing, sir.
The fact that Bob Hoskins is Mario, though, just elevates it so much. Like,
and
just
I
the
like
fact
John
that he's there.
Leguizamo as well. So,
yeah, just the fact that they're there. Like, okay, at least I like these two guys.
And then you got, was it Dennis
Hopper?
Yeah. So yeah, and I don't know, big names, and I mean, like how many of the scenes are they actually technically intoxicated being recorded?
Right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, so if you ever want some great insight into that movie, John Leguizamo, his autobiography, has a whole chapter about the making of that movie and about how when they signed on for it, of course, why would you not want to be a part of it? Because Mario Mania is huge. And he goes, we're in this thing and you don't really understand what's being created because you read the script and you're like, well, I don't play the game. So maybe maybe this is what kids are all excited about today. But then you do find out that they would just get sloshed all the time. So in most of the movie, they're drunk
a couple times.
I get
to record them drunk driving.
A real kick out of that. And then, Nintendo gets a little gun shy from the movies after that, which is a big deal. And it does open up a door for other developers to get their game movies out there.
Mortal Kombat.
Oh, Mortal Kombat. Oh, man. Do you remember the first time that you
guilty
saw
pleasure.
that and you were like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah, like the album was big at my elementary school.
Still great. I love it. So yeah.
Do you think that there have been any good video game adaptations into movies? Started as a video game, moved into the movie form that are like you would say yep, this is a good version.
I don't know if it would be a movie per se, but like the miniseries, like the Castlevania series is really good on Netflix. That's been really well done. There's a lot of people loving The Witcher that's coming out now. They're just Netflix just signed them up for 4 years now or whatever. Like the community is loving that one. I haven't watched it myself yet. But yeah, it'd be more. I think The Witcher would probably be the biggest blockbuster example of a successful release. Because there's a mini Halo movie that came out that nobody really talks about because I never watched it. But
we've all forgotten about the Final
there's an
Fantasy
Assassin's
movie.
Yeah, and I like the spirits. I don't know. I just because I'm partial to games that I'll just put my rose-colored glasses on and watch them. But
that was the first time Tucker and I really hung out.
Yeah.
We camped out for that movie overnight.
Yeah.
And we were all pretty disappointed.
I was a Final Fantasy kid and I was disappointed, but I'd like to go back and watch it again.
did you like Advent Children at all?
Nope.
Okay, so I did. I watched the whole movie waiting for Sephiroth, right? So once he shows up, and I haven't watched it since, so I'd probably hate it now. But
I think it's the amount of jumping into the air and fighting in the air.
There's a lot of
that
aerial
makes me
combat.
go, I could give a shit about this. And massive Final Fantasy VII kid right here.
Sure.
I was absolutely obsessed. First Final Fantasy game I ever beat. It would have been 6, but then my save file got accidentally corrupted on my cartridge right before I went back to school from after summer. That was a huge deal.
No kidding.
Oh yeah. But so 7, that's all I talked about. It's all I played. I went and I got the gold chocobo and I got Knights of the Round Table and a bunch of mime materia. So you could just repeat it over and over again. And I got everyone up to level 99, was obsessed with it. And then when Advent Children came out, it was different. And I realized too that for me, just as a fan, in that series, there's a big demarcation point between when they introduce voice actors.
Yeah.
I like reading it because I like that book, that bookness of it where you can supply a lot of the drama yourself in your head and where you fill it in because those games are limited in story as much as they can be.
Yeah.
But they're fun.
There's a lot of games now that is where the English dubbing is so bad that I'll either turn it off or I'll try to get the Japanese voices in there because they're just better. Yep. But some of these English, they're you take a English voice and they try to make it sound Japanese or whatever as far as the emotion that goes into it, and it just rubs you wrong.
I used to play Final Fantasy 14 in German for the voiceovers.
That'd be amazing.
Just because it was all right, it sounds cool, but I have no idea what they're saying.
Well, it's what's to say? Tell people that you love them, but say it to them in German because life is scary or whatever.
A few years ago on Christmas Eve with Tucker's dad, I went and saw Jumanji Into the Jungle.
Oh, is that the new one, right?
That's the new one, with The
love
Rock.
that movie.
To me, that is the best adaptation of video games because it's sort of making fun of it at the same time.
Yeah.
And you should in that
Cake
way.
makes me explode.
Yeah, it's well, I just won't eat cake. It's no problem. Did you ever see that movie? It's definitely worth your time. They go through some great tropes where the person who introduces that to them is they're like, welcome to Jumanji. This is this and this and this, and you've got to go and save it today. And they ask him a question, and he goes, welcome to Jumanji, because he only has.
Is it NPC?
Yeah, and it's so good. I remember the game that changed the way I thought of gaming with other people was GoldenEye.
Yep.
Because I would get 4 people together, and on a 13-inch television, we would play GoldenEye for from sundown to sunup.
And it's easily one of the most requested games in the store. Mario Kart is always a big one. Those 4-player, buddy bash games are just fantastic for it. And yeah, GoldenEye was I don't know. Artistically speaking, it does not hold up well.
No, it does not.
Terrible.
I tried playing it the other day and I was like, this is so clunky and awful.
And the 64 first person controls were just terrible. Strafing, you had to use the C buttons and stuff, and you couldn't really aim up and down easily. So
But auto targeting helped with a lot of that.
exactly, yeah, and then if you're a big Call of Duty fan, it's really hard to go back to GoldenEye unless you got some alcohol assistance or something.
I picked up the remake of that they did where they put Daniel Craig
Yeah.
in instead, and they updated all the graphics. And I'm like, nope, this isn't nearly as fun.
Yeah.
I want to shoot men who have square hands that have little notches
Boxes
for fingers
for heads.
Yeah. And I would hate because people would play Odd Job, and he was so small you'd play slappers only, and you wouldn't be able to slap him.
But with pistols, you just always get headshots on them. So,
Yep.
so I don't know if you know this or not, but the multiplayer feature of GoldenEye was not intentional. It was
Really?
an afterthought at the end of production. They're like, okay, we're ready to ship it, but we have some production window basically left, so let's throw in a multiplayer mode. So the thing that the game's most known for was not even initially planned for it.
Oh, interesting. What was the creative team behind that? Their next game
Splinter Cell?
was it?
Well,
was
they
it-
did Perfect Dark.
Yeah, that's what it
I think
was.
so,
yeah.
Perfect Dark. And everyone thought that this was. They're like, we can't wait. And they were like, yeah, we gotta play GoldenEye.
Yeah.
We gotta play GoldenEye.
Yeah. Well, that, and then to get most of the features out of Perfect Dark, you had to have the expansion pack, the video upgrade for your 64. And so without it, you just, like, the game would lag really bad. The bots weren't as good because they would be stuttering with the computer as well. And so, yeah, you had to have the expansion pack to get most of the benefits out of the game then. So,
Best-
which was another $40 to purchase.
Oof, yeah. And see, that's the thing is, before they figured out a way to charge me in game to get more out of my video games, they found ways to add
Yeah.
accessories I would need.
The 64 didn't have a rumble. You had to buy that separate. It came with the
know.
Star Fox 64. So, yeah.
And I remember Star Fox 64 being the thing that
Yeah. Would
Would you like
changed
to
my
have
life.
numb wrists?
We already know it doesn't fit in your hand right unless you
Right.
have giant banana hands, and
Yeah.
then you can touch everything easily.
Exactly. My favorite artistic look at those controllers is that it looks like Bowser's claws. So,
Oh,
yeah, so
never even thought about that.
Yeah.
I thought even just the idea of multicolored controllers
yes,
was big.
that was cool.
I remember when, and it's someone was really smart. They took every controller ever made, and they're like, "We're gonna make skins for these," which are essentially stickers you can put over the top of them. So you can put a sticker over the top of your NES controller, and it's a Metroid, theme to it. And I used to think that was so cool, and I wanted it so bad, and I completely ruined. Oh, you got a Metroid?
Samus
Yes.
is on the back of my phone. So
That's awesome.
The N64 had a kind of controller that could only have been designed in the mid 90s.
yes,
Yeah.
It's the only era it would have been designed.
Well, you think about 90s car shapes, they're just awful.
Right. like if Surge was a game controller,
Yes.
it'd be an N64 controller.
Well, best and worst accessories over time.
Probably one of the worst ones is going to be the Power Glove.
Yeah, and I was excited.
Power Glove.
We had
it's so
neighbors.
bad. That's what Lucas meant was it's really bad.
Yeah.
We had neighbors who got the Power Glove, and I was jealous. Although I never remember them actually using it.
Yeah. And I love, you see some of the sci-fi movies from the 80s where they're using the gloves for some of their props. Just fantastic.
Yep, because that was going to be the future, right?
Yep. One of the coolest ones that I didn't get to use until much later when CRTs weren't as easy. Well, they're still easily accessible, but I didn't have one. Was the bazooka-like controller for the Super Nintendo?
Yep, the Super Scope.
The Super Scope. So, it's interesting because that light gun technology is really cool how it works as far as duck hunt goes. I don't know if you've played it recently, but when you shoot the screen, it'll flash and you'll see a white box around the duck. Well, it's just a little photo reflector that's inside the gun that looks for that white box. If it sees the white box, you hit the duck. And so it's very simple how it worked. And so then you get to the Super Scope days, and it has a infrared camera or light that it's looking at to see where you're shooting. Which is funny because that's how the Wii remotes work. It's the sensor bar on top of the TV is just infrared bulbs, and then there's a camera that's looking for that infrared light.
Much like a remote control.
Exactly. So
Oh, I'm learning so much today.
yeah, we're using it and stuff with the Wii and stuff, and it's just I'm moving my hands here, but you're like, oh, this is really cool and really high tech, and it's like, no, this is really basic technology, but they programmed it in a way that works really well. And then the nice thing with the Switch is that with their accelerometers and the gyrometers, I can't remember how you say it, but the gyros, that they have them so finely tuned that they don't even need the infrared light anymore. They just have a camera inside the Joy-Cons that can sense that motion now. So
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so the Switch Joy-Cons are a lot more advanced than the Wii remotes.
Let's give some props to a man in this town who does not get the credit that he deserves for ushering in new fans of video games. Bill Schnobrick, who managed the South University Take-Two video for many, many, many years, was so forward-thinking that he had a friend in Japan where the N64 was released months earlier, ship an N64 to the United States so that we could play it months before it was released. And this is when I was just a customer. And I remember going and renting it and being like, oh my God, I'm so excited for this, because I was a Nintendo Power subscriber. And back in the day, they used to send out a VHS cassette with your Nintendo Power that would show you, like, hey, Donkey Kong 64 is coming out. This is what it's going to look like. Or the N64 is almost here. So I can't even figure out how to plug it into my TV at that time because the instructions are all
in Japanese.
And I had never worked with like the RCA cables.
Yeah,
I'd only worked with
RF before. So yeah.
So I had to call back to Take-Two, and Bill came over to my house, which is a big deal. Like, as a kid, like, the manager of Take-Two is coming to my house. And so he hooked it up. Everything was in Japanese, so trying to figure out how to play Pilot Wings, and it was such a drastic leap from the Super Nintendo controller to this controller. Like, trying to figure out how everything was supposed to go and how the buttons worked was major. But we spent an entire
from 2D
weekend
to 3D as well. So
oh God, it was just mind blowing, right? So I played through a good chunk of the Super Mario 64. Without knowing at all what the storyline was. Like, I had to one day, like, once while...
Spoiler alert, Bowser kidnapped Peach.
Yep. Well, figure out, like, I jump into the paintings. Okay, I'm following you now. It was amazing. But he was one of those guys who really understood that video games have a market. Yeah. And that Fargo is just like any other major market. And so he did a pretty good job for years and years just bringing those things into view for us. And I appreciate that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, you think about too, like you said that he came to your house, like that also says a lot about what Take-Two meant to the community back then too. Yeah. You know, and that's kind of that same personality, that idea that we're generating with Replay Games is that we're not just playing video games. We're not just selling video games. We're investing with that community as well.
Like your young customer who came in.
Exactly. So, or, you know, I had a kid that came in that he's like, I want to play Zelda on the Xbox. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't exist. So then we kind of educate a little bit as well. You know, it's like, okay, do you want to play a newer Zelda or older Zelda? And he's like, I just want to play Zelda. I was like, okay, well, I'm thinking to myself that he's not going to like this, but I'm going to give him regular Nintendo Zelda. And that game is hard. Yeah. Like it will, I mean, they didn't release games very often, so they had to make them hard. Right. So, so I sat him down and like 2 minutes later, he came back up. He's like, do you have any newer Zeldas? so I set him up with Breath of the Wild, which is a fantastic game. So
you were just referring to the RF connector with old gaming consoles. A couple years ago, I got into RGB with my old consoles. And a lot of people who grew up, I mean, basically most people who grew up our generation in the States didn't know that these consoles had the ability to output a fantastic signal, mainly because the TVs we had didn't have an RGB input. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that goes into a lot of the standards of the time, right? So with the US especially, we had RF and then we eventually got composite. And then if you're really fancy, before going into component stuff, there was S-Video that came up, but then you had to have the TV that accept that, right? Or a VCR in a lot of cases for us with the composite signal. Whereas in Japan and Europe, they had SCART or JP21. And basically the difference is with RF, it's a coax, old cable cord. You're shoveling all of your video and audio down that single line of technology. And so it's a really muddied signal. And then you get into composite where you're like, sweet, we're pulling the audio out of the video, but the video is still taking all the channels of the video signal down one line. So it's not amazing, but on a CRT, it looked good at the time. Then you can get into RGB, which takes red, green, blue video channels out of the mix, plus your sync and Luma out of the and they give them their own lines down the channel pipeline, if you want to call it that. Then of course your audio and video is off to the side as well. So you're getting dedicated lines for all these things. And so then when you throw it into like an upscaler, it's able to take that signal and be like, oh wow, this is really nice and clean. I'm going to give you a really pretty signal out of it. So, but yeah, RGB was prominent in Europe and Japan all these years, and we never knew about it. And a lot of our consoles naturally would output RGB if you had the right cable.
But none of our TVs had RGB. They basically had the RF, which was an early composite, and then composite just meaning everything is combined into one. And we had component TVs later that kind of broke things out a bit, but still had sync on one of those channels.
Usually the green. So yeah.
Right. And so when I discovered, oh my goodness, there's this RGB signal you can get out of these things, and did my research on it. And I wanted to be playing on a CRT TV. Since that's the resolution that these were made for, but I also wanted to have RGB. So I got lucky. I put just a call out in town here a couple years ago, and WDAY had an old Ikegami monitor from their production room that just was sitting on a shelf. Gave it to me for free. Weighs about 400 pounds. Got it into my house, and it's got RGB on the back.
It's got the BNC connections in, or So, so what he's talking about there is you got your normal CRT TVs is the mass-produced stuff that we had at home. But then if you got the really nice ones, they're professional video monitors and broadcast video monitors, and they had those component, the BNC connections for hooking up RGB, which gives you that dedicated line into a CRT, which is going to give you that aspect ratio and everything that you want.
Right. And also these production monitors often had slightly higher resolution, more lines.
Some of the overscan area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in these images, there's an overscan that your TV would just cut out. You just wouldn't see it. But now when I play Sonic 2 on this thing, I can see
dots at the bottom,
how the layers stacked up, and you see blue going off when they're on the water. And it's a really interesting view to see the artifacts in the game that you never knew were there before. But then you can also overscan it up a bit so you don't have to see most of that.
Out,
And this particular monitor that I have is very much on the cheaper side. It's an Ikegami, so they're the big ones would be Sony's and Panasonic's, or if you could get one of those still sell on eBay for a couple hundred to a couple thousand, if depending on the quality of the monitor.
The nice thing is they had boards that you could replace on them, so that if something did die on them, you could keep them going, basically. So
what does that do for your business? Because obviously people are playing games on televisions that are much different than the ones that were released.
And not to mention, from a business perspective, we wanted a universal, elegant look, and so we run HD TVs across the board. And slight shout out to Best Buy for helping us out with that, which I was not expecting them to be able to do much for us, but they helped us out a ton to get 30 TVs in there for a really good price. And so we run Framemeisters, which is a upscaling technology that will take a RGB signal and make it look really good on a HD screen. So we get the benefit of having that integer scaling for perfect picture upscaling, as well as being able to keep our universal look. We do keep a CRT in there just because we want to play Duck Hunt. That's the one reason why you need a CRT is because the refresh rate on the HD TVs is a little bit slower than the analog style stuff. And so what happens is it misses a frame or two. And when I talked earlier about the Duck Hunt, where it'll clear the screen black for a 1/60th of a second, right? One frame, then it'll have a white box around where the duck is. Well, oftentimes the HD TVs miss that frame, and that's why they don't work on newer TVs. And the Duck Hunt light gun technology doesn't work on newer TVs. And so that's why one reason we keep that CRT there. So
I suppose it's people who come in there and they're looking for that specific thing, and they're hoping to like get you to mess up by being like, well, I'd like to play Duck Hunt. Maybe I'll play it on one of these big TVs and be like, actually, we got CRT.
Yeah.
Oh, curses.
Right. And there's definitely like Super Smash Brothers community in town here that they really are gung-ho about Melee still for the GameCube, Super Smash Brothers Melee. But they are very strong opinioned about HD TVs do not work well with this because they like to do like sublight drifting or wave light dashing and stuff like that. Wave dashing, that's the word. But it's like these things that they're so good at this game that they know how to make actions frame specific. And so like their argument is that they can't play on a HD screen because it's too laggy to them. And it's like, well, your opponent's also having that same handicap, that's my biggest thing. And not to mention the fact that doing the scientific research on it, like the Framemeisters have less than 120 millisecond lag on it, and your eyes can't perceive anything less than 200 milliseconds. So I don't know where the argument stands there, but that's where they're just like, well, I don't like it, basically.
Yeah, people need an excuse for when they lose.
But we were really intentional about this look, and we wanted to be able to play them in the correct setting as well. We want to play on the original hardware. The only kind of emulation, if you want to call it that we do is when a game's been reported to a newer system. So the Mega Man Legacy Collection for PS2 or the Switch or PS4, technically a form of emulation, but it's a way that you could play it in a more convenient setting. But then we also have the original games for the original hardware too.
But like a PS3 that can play PS1 is emulating the PS1,
Right.
but a PS2 actually has PS1 hardware inside of it.
Yep.
So it's so typically if like you're like, I want to play PS1 on the best hardware possible, like what should I be? It's probably a PS2, I think.
PS2 or an actual PS1, right?
Right.
And then the other tricky part too is with the PS1 era of gaming, there's a lot of games that they started switching resolutions on them. So Silent Hill is a great one where going into your item inventory screen, it's a 480i resolution versus the normal 240p resolution that it's projecting at. And what that does for the Framemeisters is the Framemeister says, oh my gosh, the resolution changed, and they drop the signal. So then about 4 seconds later, it reestablishes the signal and gets it going again. Well, it does that every time you go in and out of your inventory screen. So if you're in the middle of a fight, you don't want to be going into your inventory screen and then waiting 4 seconds of you not being able to see anything, but the game's still running. So that's one of the trickiest parts right now is with the PS1, and some Nintendo 64 games do it as well. Saturn games are notorious for it as well.
What about, do you guys do anything with handhelds?
Yep. So we got pretty much every major system across the board. And then, so I got PSP, PS Vita, Game Boy Advance, original Game Boy Color, if you want to get technical, Nintendo DS, 3DS. So
anything that people have a proclivity to? Like, do you have a lot of people coming in wanting to get their hands on that original Game Boy?
Sometimes they always want to play Pokemon is the big one. And then some with the speedrunning communities and stuff, there's a type of Pokemon run called a Nuzlocke, where essentially the first Pokemon you run into out in the wild is the one you capture, and that's the one that stays with you for the game. And so every new area you go to, the first Pokemon you run into is the one you capture, and that's the one that's going to be part of your 6-man team. And so it makes it a really challenging run as well, especially when you get to the late game stuff. So we get a couple of customers that like to play that. And, it's one of those, it's kind of cool. It's like when you play solitaire by yourself that you're going to let yourself cheat a little bit because this Pokemon's just garbage. I don't want him. So, if you're doing a Nuzlocke by yourself, that's fine or whatever. But that's one of the interesting aspects. And then one little side note to that emulation conversation was one of the things that I really enjoy about emulation is the ROM hacking that's going on. And so that came from where the Nuzlocke is coming from. There's this community online that's all about homebrew and emulation and stuff like that. And so one of the coolest things I've seen so far is Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo and Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The speedrunning community has gotten so good at those games individually that a ROM hacker's like, okay, what if you play them both at the same time? So what that means is for a portion of the game, you'll be in Legend of Zelda, but they've randomized all of the items between the two games. And so in Zelda, you might find items for Super Metroid.
What?
And then vice versa. And then there's certain points in the game that you can go to forcibly switch between the games.
Oh my God. So
there's a pretty, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so like Samus can fight Ganon?
No, not like that. You'll still be in Super Metroid, but the items that you need to complete Super Metroid will be found in Legend of Zelda. And then vice versa.
So you can get the Master Sword in Super Metroid.
And so then, but you can't use it until you go back to Zelda.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
And it's crazy hard. It's really cool because you see these speedrunners that they know both games so well. And sometimes you need to know some of the glitches to get around certain barriers that you technically weren't supposed to get around. But for the sake of beating the game, you had to know the game that well. So
there's this amazing fan created Ninja Turtles game coming out. And I'm blanking on the name of it. Previous guest Tim Larson showed me the trailer for it. It looks like it's in the style of like a side scroller, but they've added, I want to say, 60 playable characters.
Wow.
So characters from like the cartoons. I mean, side characters like Vernon from the Newsroom that you can play in this game, and then they're creating levels where they're basically taking sprites from all these different games and making them look the same, and then they're creating new sprites for different characters. So you can play as April, you can play as Casey Jones, you can play as basically any of the action figures that we would have grown up with. and I believe they have a Patreon, like a crowdfunding that's helping them make this thing. But it's like, it looks like the ultimate Ninja Turtles side-scrolling game.
That's awesome.
And so that's what we have to look forward to. Where, because of the democratization of the internet, we just have the ability to collaborate and make something you'd never see before.
I have spent hours trying to find the name of the model who's on the side of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game who plays April.
Did you track down the photographer for that?
I did. But I can't find anything on the model itself. And so internet, if you can find it, I'd love to just talk with her these days because she's been I crushed on her big time. But she's such a huge part. Like she's still showing up in video arcades today.
Well, they're making those mini cabinets now that are turtle specific. She's right on the side of it.
Yeah, and she's the only human being. Mm-hmm. She's got that great
and
looking,
Shredder was a human.
Yeah.
Was Shredder?
Yep, Shredder was human and she was human and the turtles were all drawn.
Yeah.
Interesting. So talk about video game development. So we're living in an era right now where if people like the common man can create a video game if they really want.
Well,
It'd be rudimentary, but
I remember back in like the dark days of the internet where you still had to dial up to get onto the internet, there was
I'd say we're still in the dark days will never end on the internet. I'd say, but I get what you mean.
Like the trying to get some of that information.
Mom, get off the phone.
Right? Yeah. The hardest thing with getting into game development, especially when I was going through high school and stuff like that, even there was very little information as to like this is the track you need to go down if you want to become a game developer. Like there wasn't this is a school you go to when I was entering high school and stuff like that. And I remember downloading a tool called RPG Toolkit that would teach you how to make JRPG games, but it was like, a fan-made creation kind of stuff. And so it was poorly documented. The instructions on how to do stuff was really not clear. And let alone learning how to program on your own was difficult. And so by the time I was finishing high school, there's a huge surge in game development schools that weren't going to charge you an arm and leg kind of thing for it. And so I settled on a school called University of Advancing Technology out of Arizona. And the fascinating thing is that at that time they were prototyping an online degree for game development. And so it was, game design was the degree it was for. And I was able to stay in Fargo, work full time and still go to school full time to pursue designing games, which is a hilarious little segue to my past life with finishing high school. I hated English. I did not want anything to do with English. I hated writing. And so not only do I marry an English major from NDSU, I go to school for game design, which is literally business technical writing for writing your game on paper. And so like you're, writing a 300-page paper is nothing for me now. But at the time I was like, are you serious? So I went to school for game design, and it was during my senior year that I was like, I could pursue AAA development if I wanted to. I could go to Seattle and do all that. But one of the biggest things that was happening with the industry that's still prevalent today, that you go on contract when you get hired by a company. And so you're hired for 6 months. If you're lucky, you'll get a year contract kind of thing. And then either they'll renew your contract or they'll say, okay, we don't need you anymore. And it's not like they're any animosity towards you about it. It's just because they don't have funding or whatever for it. And so I didn't want to take my newlywed wife at the time and be like, okay, we're going to go live in Seattle for 6 months and then go down to San Francisco for 6 months and then over to Dallas for 6 months. That would just not be good for her kind of thing. And so we decided that we're going to make our roots in Fargo stay rooted here. We both grew up in Fargo and stuff like that. So we wanted to just keep ourselves here basically, and then we're close to family and all that. So now on the side, I do more independent stuff where not so much with the store, but when I have time, I'll do just little fun projects basically. And I helped with a friend of mine started Pods Game Design, where he teaches kids how to make games. He developed a curriculum that he did with MSUM's College for Kids. And then I helped teach that with him. And then he's turned that curriculum into his own business model now. I help run the Fargo Game Makers, where it's a collection of individuals interested in making games. I try to help educate, get people connected to different skill sets, and then, just trying to keep accountability on people who are working on a project that just kind of like, hey, how's this project going kind of thing. And then we also do an annual game jam, which this year in the first weekend of October, we're doing our 5th game jam, our annual game jam through the Fargo Game Makers, which is really cool to see just how long we've been doing it now. But it was just one of those things that, video games have always been a part of my life. And I remember in like 8th grade where they ask you like, if you could be anything you want to do, what would you want to be? And it's like, I would have loved to work for Nintendo kind of thing. And so a couple years ago, it was like 2015, I actually got a qualified license for Nintendo Wii U development. I never really did much with it because it was like $3,500 to get the development kit for it, but it was cool to be at least a technical licensed developer for Nintendo. And so I had access to all the stuff. If I had the development kit, I actually had a project that I could run on a Nintendo Wii U. And then also with the Xbox 360 days, they had a framework that you could actually run games off of a 360. And so like I had a couple working projects playing on my Xbox, which was really cool.
Are people still developing games for older systems?
Actually, it's resurging now. There wasn't so much back then. I mean, it was the 360 and the Wii U were the two big ones you could program for. But then there's been a huge homebrew community that's always been around. But the last couple of years, there's been some really good breakthroughs, which I talked about the ROM hacking. A lot of those guys are creating these kits. And so like the regular Nintendo, there's now a tool that you can purchase that is, it's nice. It's a graphical interface for making brand new Nintendo NES games. And so what's fascinating about that is you don't need to know assembly to do that, which assembly is really rudimentary, low level programming. It's really difficult. And so this graphical user interface will make it a lot simpler to program games. Then you can get a flashable card and you put your game onto the card and you plug it into a regular Nintendo and it runs. One of our developers is actually working on a series of games right now that not the last meeting, but the meetup before that, he actually brought it in and we were playing it on my regular Nintendo in the store.
Oh, wow.
And so that was really cool. And then
we want to develop a JJ Meets World game where you get to pick who you're going to interview, and based on the questions you ask, it's kind of story mode, like RPG style. You get a certain amount of points that don't matter.
I do know that when I listen to the podcast and the opening song for the podcast, I just feel like I need to see some sort of like sprite based JJ spinning around. JJ Meets World.
I see JJ as jumping between animation styles throughout. So pixelation as one. There's got to be some sort of DuckTales type. At some point as well.
Like a Disney Afternoon type.
Yeah, but all we would do is we would just use cells of Doofus Duck. And then we're good.
Yep.
He's the best.
Speaking of the previous episode, we went down JJ went down the virtual reality rabbit hole. And in that conversation, we referenced Nintendo's Virtual Boy.
Yeah, we really crapped on it.
It's a very crap-onable.
It's a terrible product.
Console.
So, yeah.
Well, Mr. CJ brought us.
Yeah. So you walk in and you've got a Virtual Boy case with you. Now, what I love about this case is, again, going back to my Take-Two days.
Yes.
This is the exact same case we had when we rented out any kind of console, and it would come in this. It's only slightly different than the VCR that would come inside of its own clamshell case, and you could put the tape in, and there were ports on the back. That was it. You weren't going to do anything else with that VHS player. People come in and ask about Virtual Boy?
Yeah, so this is actually the model that I keep on my countertop that people can be like, oh my gosh, it's a Virtual Boy, and they ask a few questions and does it work? And it's like, well, kind of. The left eyepiece doesn't work right now.
So it's even more headache inducing.
Right? Yeah. No, it's one of those unfortunate things where I had a younger kid. I was in the back setting up a customer up with the game, and I came back up, and there's this kid just wrapping on the focusing lens on it, and I was like, what are you doing? So I got to figure out what I was going to take to fix it. I got one that's sealed, ready for sale, and I should say it's not sealed. I shrink wrapped it, but the cool thing with this one that's for sale is the serial number on the warranty card. Back then, Nintendo would have warranty cards on all the boxes. So on this box, the warranty card, the serial number matches the unit that's inside. So I couldn't find any kind of information for selling it on there, except for if you had a unit with a box, it was worth about $400. And so like, okay, well, I'll throw it up for $500 and see what we get for it. So.
Nice. But is there a holy grail of something that you're looking for that at this point? Because I think, you're not going to walk into a game store, a used game store, and find something amazing that's in the discount bin.
Right.
But garage sales.
It's interesting what people will still find at garage sales, and it's always going to be, you got to go to the garage sales, right? You got to see, and it's going to be something that doesn't know what they have kind of thing. And, a more genuine person will be like, okay, well, this one's worth a lot more, so I'll give you a couple extra bucks for it or whatever. But I mean, a Chrono Trigger you're probably going to spend $200 for that kind of game. But the holy grail that the store is looking for, there's not really anything that like we're specifically looking for. Our model, since we do the buy, sell, trade stuff, if it's the first game that comes into the store, we reserve it for the arcade. And so that's why we have almost 5,000 games ready to play. Then we also, all of the duplicates are for sale. So we have almost 2,000 games ready to sell. So there's games that we're missing, of course. There's easily 17,000 physically printed games for consoles.
Okay.
And we have about 5,000 ready to go. So
Now, when in the world of game collecting, how much does the actual physical condition of the cartridge itself, like I know if you have a game in the original packaging, that's one thing, right? But if it's just the cartridge and the label is half peeled off, but it still plays fine, how much does that affect the price in the collector market?
Well, so there's a couple different mentalities that go with that. So the biggest thing with collecting is, I don't have this game, I want it, and most collectors usually want it because they want to also play it.
Right.
So they'll haggle on the condition of a game like that, and that's the best practice to do is like, hey, this label's torn or whatever. Can you knock off a few bucks or whatever, 10% kind of thing. Right. It really depends on what the value of the game is, because there's a lot of games that are only worth $5 and you don't really care at that point. But one of the mentalities for collecting is you'll have like a spreadsheet that you can, Google Docs or something like that, and you can look it up and you're like, okay, you've made a note that I have a torn label, but here's one with a good label on it, so I can, swap them out then.
Yep.
So that's what a lot of collectors do. And then with our mentality for selling games is we just do a market analysis. Basically, there's a really great online tool called pricecharting.com, and they look at all the eBay auctions going on, and they're like, oh, this is the general average price for this game. So that kind of gives you a good market point of what that game's worth.
Right.
But then we also take that and we look at what our competitors in town are selling their games for, and we hedge the difference.
Right.
So our goal is to always undercut our competition, obviously, but more specifically, I won't name drop them, but one of our competitors in town is notorious for being easily $5 to $10 more than what the value of the game is. In some instances, they're like double or more, and they use the same tools that we do, but because they know that the game will sell for this price, they'll sell it at that. Even if it sits on the shelf for 3-4 months, they'll try to get more money for it. And so we really wanted to try to normalize that market and offer what you could try to get it online for, because we could see the differences between what that online price is minus the shipping cost. So we're trying to get it just the value of the game. And then we look at what our competition sells it for. We undercut them. And then we also give more for trade-ins as well. And so, like I said before, if it's the first game that comes into the store, we reserve it for the arcade. Well, we want to get as many games as possible. So we'll give you 60% value there. And then if it's a game that we already have, we'll do 30%. And that's just the cash option, where our competition usually does 10 to 12% for the cash. So we're, even on the bad days, we're looking at 3 times what they're offering kind of thing, which is hilarious conversations that I'll have with customers that are like, oh, I could get this more at so-and-so. And I was like, I highly doubt it, but you're welcome to try.
Right.
And I remember when we were at Take-Two days, like we'd have the one ring of the Walmart Steelers.
Yep.
And they would come in and be like, how much would you get for this? And they're like, okay. And then they come back later and they're like, okay, I guess we'll sell it to you. And they're like, okay, well now it's less because we know you've already shopped around.
Yep. There was a certain joy of working at Take-Two because they would let us, for a long time, they would let us buy things for 25 cents more than we paid for it.
I loved that policy.
Me too. So you'd get someone who'd come in and they would bring the entire Band of Brothers DVD set, and it's a week before it's due to come out on the shelves, and they'd have 5 of them and say like, oh, I got all these for my birthday. What you give me for them? And I'll go, I will give you $10 a piece for these. Are you kidding me? These are $100 at the store. I'd be like, yep, but the store's not going to pay you cash money on a Sunday night.
Drove them off the lot, man.
Not to mention maybe arrest you for it. So.
Right, exactly.
These are not shrink wrapped.
Exactly.
They have been pirated.
Yeah.
Let's say I need $20. Okay. How many copies of Madden 2007 do I need to bring in to get $20?
Probably close to 200.
That is always the saddest section of any pawn shop is all the Maddens that are on the wall.
That's one thing I need to work on my 64 for sale lot right now, is because I have a ton of, you're going to get flooded with sports styles no matter what, but yeah, you're averaging, like I probably pay the most for sports styles because I'm trying to work on that value part of it. But yeah, you'll get a Madden title for 50 cents kind of thing. So
if you guys ever open up like dining in it, you could use those as drink coasters.
Right, exactly.
Just the disc itself is just a drink coaster.
I actually have a fat stack of discs that are not resurfaceable. I've tried to resurface them, they won't play. And so like I talked about that. So
you can make a really cool table.
Yes. Well, so
epoxy is big these days.
Our countertop is going to be really slick. I was going to take those broken CDs and make them part of our countertop and epoxy over them. And then my brother works for a large format print company down in Texas that he's like, hey, I got this really cool idea. What do you think about it? And basically he created a document where it's these 2-inch by 6-inch inlays of video game backgrounds. And so we filled out our 13-foot countertop with all these backgrounds, and then we got a massive Replay Games logo in the middle, and then we're going to epoxy over top of that. So
I've got a dream of putting together a table, and I would love if this is a JJ Meets World table where I take old issues of Nintendo Power, and you know how they had the pull out like level runs with the entire thing. I'd love to like layer those, and then so you can look at it and so you can be like, oh my gosh, you know, like this is DuckTales or this Chip and Dale's. I noticed that you did not like a post I had recently, CJ, that I'm a little dumbfounded by. I got a copy of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartridge signed by Kevin Eastman.
Did I not like?
It doesn't mean he dislikes it.
I like that one.
Nope. I just looked at it. I did not see any likes. I did not even see a comment on it.
I'm going to fix that right now.
Yeah.
So.
I've always wondered
I did see it,
if
so
there was a
bad.
spike in like broken controller repair after that game came out because kids were throwing their controller against the wall.
That game
in
frustrated me
anger
so
at
much.
the underwater level.
Oh.
Being a massive Ninja Turtles fan, I
just
hated
say
the
that I
fact
was
that I
probably
couldn't get
driving.
past like the first 10 minutes of the game.
There are two type of video game players out there. There's the video game players who sit there and work their hands, and they're the other people who physically move with what they want to do. So if you're going to the right, you're gonna like actually lean to the right. And I had a neighbor who I want to get on as a guest here, so I'm not going to throw him under the bus yet. Who his whole body, you couldn't sit on a couch with him because he'd lean forward and backward, and if he'd fall down like a pit, he'd kind of grab your arm because he was so invested into what's going on.
I got the love icon on there. So.
Oh, I like that. Fantastic. I've got a bad habit, and this is going to be one of those things that you might cringe at with this, but I've been collecting some of my favorite games from the past and putting them in shadow boxes.
Sure.
And hanging them on my wall.
Yep.
And recently someone came into my office and they were like, "What are you doing? Why didn't you see Toy Story 2?" That's the whole point of that movie. You're putting these things in a box that you can't play with. And I said, it's true, but like I've got DuckTales, I've got the Redux for that. And but it's sort of like I just want to keep them safe. Right.
Yeah.
I want to keep them cozy.
The nice thing is, the biggest thing that I hate seeing with video games is the yellowing on those old cartridges.
Mm-hmm.
When they turn yellow, it just means that they've been in the sun too much. They've gotten too much UV light because the way that they painted the gray into that cartridge is it's a bromine chemical solution that made it fireproof basically, or fire retardant rather. Well, the UV light would bring that bromine out, and so that's what turns it yellow. And there's actually a chemical process you can do that will burn it out and make it look really nice and gray again. It just won't be fire retardant anymore, which is not a concern, I don't think.
Someone tries to set your Nintendo on fire.
I remember seeing somebody online who used like lemon juice and like
lemon juice is one
spruced up like a SNES really beautifully.
It does. Lemon juice is a good cheap way to do it, and depending on how bad it's yellowed, it will depend on that. But I can't remember what the actual process is for the chemical, but it's one you want to wear gloves for, kind of thing. So because you're gonna cook that out. But there's some very badly yellowed YouTube videos you can see of yellowed cartridges that they'll do that chemical burn on it. And it's amazing what it does for them. So
quick tip too, if you are going down the RGB rabbit hole and you're looking at Super Nintendo, you wouldn't have known it because the outside looked exactly the same, but Super Nintendo actually went through like 20 different revisions of the board when it was being shipped out. And the very first version, or I should say like the second version of the Nintendo, condensed like 2 or 3 different chips that were on the motherboard into one chip, calling it the one chip SNES. And that was when they stopped using whatever that process with the plastic was that would allow it to off gas and become yellow. So if you have a Super Nintendo that's yellowed, you know you don't have a one chip. And the reason you would want to know that or not is that there's just a slight difference in quality between the one chip and like the 3-chip board or whatever you'd call it. And you want to aim for the one chip. It has just slightly less noise to it. So if you're trying to get like the best RGB picture out of a Super Nintendo, aim for a one chip. And if it's not yellowing, then you know it might be a one chip. And then I think you have to look at the serial number.
Yeah, the serial number is the big one. And then, like I said, it'll have a little less noise. And from my experience, you won't notice the difference unless they're side by side kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or you really want that perfect picture kind of thing. But the one chip is definitely the more favorable of the two models. Or you can get to like the re-release like junior console, if you want to call it, that looked like a Super Famicom almost, where that one you actually have to modify that one for RGB. So,
and I actually don't have a Super Nintendo, but I have a Super Boy.
Nice.
Which is basically a Super Nintendo that's handheld, so you can place the regular cartridges. It's shaped like a really large Super Nintendo controller with a tiny little screen on the inside of it.
Yep.
And then you can actually hook it up to a TV via composite and actually connect Super Nintendo controllers to it and play it just like a Super Nintendo. And on your old composite TV, it looks exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I'm playing it, but I don't have a system that I could get a native RGB signal out of yet.
Oh man.
So when I do get one, I'm aiming for a one chip. A, because of it's one chip, and B, I don't want the yellowing plastic. I'd rather it not look like that.
Why do they make Battletoads so hard?
Because it's such a good game.
Oh, I tried to play that recently, and I thought to myself, how did I get so far when I was much better as a kid at video games, especially those old school ones, than I am today.
And a lot of that just comes down to a time difference, right? I'm guessing you had a lot more free time back then.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I don't have a lot of free time now. I'm doing a podcast.
Right, exactly. So
I could be putting myself to better uses. But I've got this nostalgia. I think nostalgia is the best thing video games have going for them right now. Is there people who are older with expendable income? I spent $50 on that Turtles cartridge with Kevin Eastman's signature on it, and I love it.
Yeah.
And little JJ, $50 would have been like $50. It's like 2-3 games.
yeah.
That's a whole month's worth of 5 for 5 for 5s.
Right, so you think about like the good Take-Two throwback there. So, but you think about like the when the NES was on its way out, when the Super Nintendo was on its way out, because the 64 was so big, like you go to pawn shops, garage sales, and some of those games were like 50 cents now. And it's like, now they're like $100. It's ridiculous. And it's interesting to see like, going into the current gen stuff, I'm really hopeful that PlayStation 5 will be backwards compatible to the PlayStation 1 all the way through this generations. They've released patents that suggest that might be the case, but they haven't officially stated so. But if they do make it PS2 compatible, that's going to be huge for that retro market. That will explode. So,
And I guess that would have to be with emulation, right?
Right. It would be emulation for sure. But, if they do it the way that they did with the PS3 and the PlayStation 1, backwards compatibility, where it was good, it didn't have that sync loss, and it's not going to be as clean as a FrameMeister upscale,
right?
Or just going straight into a CRT. But if they can make it the same way that they did with the PS1 and make it workable, that'll be really big for that market. So,
How about the nostalgia we're getting with these re-release mini consoles?
like the SNES Classic and NES Classic.
I waited, I think, almost 4 hours for the SNES Classic because I did not get an NES. I went to 4 stores, and I swear to God, I got up to the front every time. They're like, sorry, we're sold out. Sorry, we're sold out.
Yeah.
And I was super bummed.
You were talking earlier about, games that were overly hyped or whatever. I don't get hyped for that kind of stuff just because there's a lot of letdown stuff. And then particularly with the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, like, convenience isn't a big issue for me. Like I have the original game, so I don't need the re-release stuff. But the SNES Classic I was interested in for Star Fox 2. Because that was never released officially outside of emulation. So it would have been fun to play through Nintendo's proprietary emulator, but I still don't have a SNES Classic, but I did play Final Fantasy that when I was playing the first one, I played it on the NES Classic that it was traded into the store, and I was like, well, I didn't really want it for the store, but if you're okay with $16, I'll take it off your hands. And so I got one for $16 basically. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with if I'll get a SNES Classic or not. So
the Raspberry Pi community
Yes.
is massive when it comes to gaming, because the processors in those little teeny tiny computers have been good enough to emulate at least old consoles for a while now. And now with their most recent release, it should do a pretty good job with PS1 and 2. Or at least PS1.
Yeah. Have you looked into like the FPGA stuff with
not yet.
analog or NT stuff?
But that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's cool because basically what this is it's physical hardware that they're making that is mimicking that old technology, and it's mimicking so well that in ways that they didn't expect it to. Like when what was his name? was it Kevtris maybe? Anyways, he was working on the NES FPGA stuff, and he plugged in a zapper gun and was expecting it not to work, but was blown away that it did work. And so he's like, okay, what else will work? Like a power glove worked without issue. He was plugging in all these other accessories that they worked because that hardware was mimicking itself so well that it was beyond what he expected it to do. So yeah. So it's really cool what they're doing with that. And like you said, if they can get it to a point where like the PS1 Classic is, everybody hates the lineup of the games on it, it still runs pretty well from what I hear. So,
well, the SNES Classic had 21 games, right? $80.
Yep.
And I pieced together a RetroPie for $60. And my illegally downloaded games that I had, it's countless how many games you can put on there.
Sure.
And there's more steps to doing that, but I was not the audience for the SNES Classic, just like you weren't.
Right.
The SNES Classic makes total sense when you're trying to find a particular audience for it.
For my sister and her fiance, it was perfect because they want something they could plug into their like man cave garage.
Right.
It's just an HDMI cord,
and it had super punch out, so you're all good.
Like I said, convenience, right? And so that's where it's really where it's at is you're selling that convenience option for it. And so, and like with Replay Games, it's hooked up and ready to go in the original format. So we didn't have any need for the store's perspective of it. But all my consoles that I had at home are now part of the store. So I don't have any games at home. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll take this classic off your hands. So
is your wife calling like, CJ, it's time to come home?
No,
just one more level.
No,
this game doesn't pause.
I do joke though, after running this store now for over a year, that it's like I play less games now than when I was working a normal job, just because I'm sinking all my time into the store now. So
what's happened to me at the Fargo?
Cobbler's children's shoes or something.
Go without shoes. Well, I saw less movies when I was working at the Fargo Theater than I did when I was just a regular Joe.
Another cool tie back to like the Take-Two days.
When you were a civilian.
Yeah.
But one of the things I loved about working at Take-Two is like you go see a movie and they'll reimburse your ticket.
Oh God, that was program,
great.
and it wasn't just yours. They would let you and then
bring in one friend
more.
or something. Yeah. So
I made big
fantastic.
bank. In fact, I had a problem because I've got a movie ticket collection, and they wanted you to turn in your stubs, and I had to convince my manager. I was like, listen, will you please let me photocopy these and I'll write my name, like I'll write JJ on it so that I can't ever turn it back in again. And he was like, oh, okay, I mean, I guess why? And I remember getting like hundreds and hundreds of dollars back. Oh
yeah. I mean, I think it was like you could see one movie a week or something like that and they'll comp it. So that was a really cool program.
Yeah.
We're trying to institute that here on JJ Meets World, but the boss won't let us do it.
Yeah. It's
pretty hard.
the purse strings. It's $25 for a single person to see a movie nowadays. It's ridiculous.
We sold the podcast to an offshore company. They control everything now.
So the last thing I want to get your comments on is this. When I was younger, you bought a video game and then you had the video game. You traded it with a friend down the block if you feel you got the most out of the Tiny Toon Adventures.
I feel like I know where you're leading with this. I love it already. So.
Yeah, okay, good. But you don't actually, when you buy a video game nowadays, you don't actually own the whole thing. This is the last
question. It's definitely going to cause at least 20 minutes of conversation. That's cool though.
I am against this world where when you buy a game, you really don't get the full game. You're getting 3/4 of the game, but they're going to put out new skins. They're going to put out additional levels, all of this stuff that you don't get a chance to experience. And it drives me crazy.
So there's a few different facets of that question basically to tackle. The first one is looking at how the game industry has evolved. Sorry. Anyways, so you go into like the 360 PS3 days where DLC started becoming a thing. The first issue is if you spend $60 on a game and then they're going to release more story and you don't get the full story until you buy all the DLC. I have issues with that because you purchase this story, you want to hear that story. So there's an issue there, but one of the reasons why I'm slightly okay with it is because if you think back about just how the price of a game and inflation works, as far as like the Atari 2600, if it was released today with inflation, would be an $800 console. That's how much it cost for a person back then to purchase one. And so games were a luxury. They're very expensive. And then you get into the regular Nintendo days, and those games were brand new for anywhere from $29.99 to $39.99. And then the Super Nintendo days is where they were $50. And a couple of the 64 titles were like up to $80 a title. But then you get to the GameCube and moving forward, they've been $60 for over 15 years now, close to 20 years now. They haven't increased in price, but obviously their cost to make games has increased. And so they had to figure out how to get more of that money back. There's the argument that because there's so many more people playing games that they're making more money naturally by the number of sales, but they're also investing a lot more money into the games as well. So it's one of those double-edged swords with that kind of DLC. But then
if I make a game, how much is my company taking home and how much? I think of it like going to a movie, right?
Yep.
So the movie theater keeps very little of that ticket.
Right.
Most of it goes back to the distributor, to the studio, everything like that. If I make a game like Red Dead Redemption, how much is actually coming back to me versus how much is going towards
methodology there? So the developer is not going to get they'll get some out of it, right? They'll make a decent amount out of it, but the way that the $60 is split up is that 12 to 20% is reserved for the end market seller person. So Replay Games sells a brand new title. We get roughly 8 to 12% off of the discount for our vendor discount. And so the remaining $48 to $50 is then eaten up by, you got marketing, you got publishing, and then developing. And so then the developing phase is huge in that it's usually they get the lowest split out of those three. Marketing usually takes up the largest amount, and then the publisher takes up the second chunk. And so the publisher is the one that's giving the developer the money that, hey, we want you to make this game, so here's a bunch of money to cover your costs for that, and then you'll get this much royalties out of it. And so the developer's not really getting a ton of money out of it in general. So the nice thing with DLC is you're not getting so much cut from a marketing or vendor part per se. It's going straight to the publisher and the developer. And so you think about like publishers like EA or Activision, that they're going to be, there's a reason why EA as a whole company is like 5 years in a row of the worst company to work for across all industries. Mm-hmm. Like they've gotten the poop award multiple years in a row. And so there's some issues where like with DLC, I have issues if you're not going to release that full story, but I understand that they need to get that money somehow. But then also like skins and stuff like that, I don't get excited about that kind of stuff. And so, if you're going to sell that for a microtransaction, that's cool or whatever. But with like the Star Wars Battlefront games that were a really big controversy with loot boxes and microtransactions, where you could technically get that stuff for free if you played the game straight for 24 hours a day for 35 years. And so there was an issue with that kind of microtransaction scheme, because then you also get into the conversation of loot boxes with gambling tendencies and stuff like that. That's something that I'm very against as far as that kind of microtransaction goes. But then, if you got the complete story released with the game, but then there's some offshoot stories or side stories you want to sell extra for, it's one of those that buying the sequel to a game kind of thing now, where you're getting like the Star Wars canon books. So, you got your $10 book, but then there's something that they introduced in this book that another writer took off another tangent kind of thing. So I kind of look at it that way as far as piecemealing your game together. And then, it depends on really, like Grand Theft Auto, I think is a terrible game for microtransactions. You're spending real money to get more fake money in the game to buy another car that doesn't go faster, just looks different. It's another skin kind of thing. Fortnite made like $5 billion last year or something like that, 5.4 billion, all off of a free game, but it's all skins and stuff like that I don't care for. And it's just one of those things where, like it doesn't pertain to me, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong for selling it kind of thing. But the biggest thing that's coming out to now is that gambling tendencies stuff.
Yeah, I can see a lot of people. Well, and I think there's a lot of completists out there, right? Yep. So when I play A Link to the Past, I want to get all my heart health. I want to get all the items.
Yeah.
And nowadays I can't do that so much without having to download certain pieces.
Yeah.
I think of the South Park World of Warcraft episode. Where they've got this ultimate weapon on a USB drive, and all it is pushing the fact that we've if they want to make more money, they just release a new weapon, right, and they're like, this weapon's better than all the other weapons that you can get just in the game, but we'll give you this and it's better.
That's where it's like that base game. And then where I was thinking you might have been going with the question too was games as a service now versus when you buy a physical copy, you have all the physical rights attached to that copy. If you wanted to destroy the copy or you sell it to a friend or whatever, you can do whatever you want with that copy. You just can't duplicate it.
Right.
And that's where my biggest gripe with the industry right now, as far as Microsoft is considering going digitally only, is that, okay, I'm going to spend $60 on a game. Well, in 20 years, what's Microsoft's duty to continue allowing me to download it? So what did I purchase? What do I actually own for that $60?
I've got that situation going on right now with my original Wii U. I bought a bunch of games on the virtual
WiiWare
store.
Stuff,
Yeah. And now I can't even figure out if I can get access
you
to
can't
it. I don't
download it
think
anymore.
so.
So yeah, they shut the service off. And so that again is that, okay, what did I purchase there? Whereas, with an old cartridge, you stick into a console, it's going to run the same way it did 20 years ago. But then even so, like going to the PS3 days, like they have quality of life updates or bug fixes and stuff like that. Some of those games are going to lose support, that they're not going to give you those updates anymore. So you'll play a broken game basically. And so that's one of the things that I have an issue as far as the digital age of video games goes, is you're purchasing this game that they had to release it by X date, and then the day one patch is no longer ready to download anymore.
Right, like using Windows XP, they're like, we're no longer providing, troubleshooting services for Windows XP.
Right, if a game is a MMO, so you've got everything is connected to servers on the internet. Well, what happens once they decide to stop servicing those servers? Old games go into legacy mode, and they might maintain a server, and then you'll have fans that find a way to create a private server that then gets shut down by that company. But EverQuest, I think Project 99 or 96, where you need a very specific titanium version of EverQuest. But you can play EverQuest as it was at this particular year on a private server, not run by the company that runs that.
And World of Warcraft's a much bigger dog right now with that, because there was a massive server that was being run that they finally DMCA'd and shut it down, that had like 15,000 players or something like that on it. Like there's a massive ton of players on it. And, it was like a big deal when they shut that down. And it's one of those things. Well, my issue with that was Blizzard wasn't supporting vanilla WoW. Like vanilla WoW in the current game does not exist. A lot of the content's been removed or reworked. And so like my wife and I love World of Warcraft, but we don't play enough to justify $15 a month. So we actually run a private Wrath of the Lich King server, which is like 4 or 5 expansions old now, that most of that content doesn't even exist in the current game. And so like the version of game that we wanted to play doesn't even exist now. So, there's some gray area that I've self-justified that, so that it's okay for us to do this. But then, it's a private server that it's only us two on it. It's we don't even have internet at home right now. We just play it on our internal network. Right. And so it's like, if they try to find us, they're not going to see anything kind of thing. Shh. But, it's one of those things where like that games as a service stuff where like I get that convenience factor of it. And then like there's, Google Stadia. I don't know if you've looked into that at all. But it's you'll pay a subscription and you'll be able to access all these games per month. And it's just, my biggest worry is, how are the developers going to make money, and what's going to incentivize them to want to continue making games for those platforms, let alone if the entire industry wants to go that route, how are they going to be making that money that they need?
The service I've been using up until recently just to save some money was called Shadow.
Okay.
And basically what Shadow is basically you treat the internet as like a really long video cable between your monitor and the computer that you're using.
Sure.
So they just house servers, and you pay them $35 a month, and you get effectively your own Windows instance.
Sure.
You'll have a dedicated graphics card, and if you're someone who doesn't want to drop a couple grand on a new PC build, which you would probably have to upgrade 2 years down the line anyways, but you want to play some PC games, if you have a fast enough internet connection, then you basically you have to buy your own game. They don't sell you games or anything. They basically just create an instance of Windows in the cloud. And
that's kind of what Stadia is doing.
Yep, exactly. And then you're just, as long as your bandwidth is above like 20 meg, you're good.
You'll get it at 60 frames a second kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the biggest worry I have with that is that the majority of users worldwide don't have that good of internet. And so, as there's going to be some funneling that goes on with this kind of industry move.
Well, so with Shadow, when I was first researching them, because I wanted to use a service like that, but I wasn't convinced I would get like a fast enough internet connection. And what they've done is in almost every single state in the country now, they have a data center in that state.
Oh, sure.
So you actually can find out if in your state you can get a really close data center. North Dakota's got one.
Nice.
And most states in the union have one now. And my connection is actually pretty slow. I think I basically average about 20 meg down.
Sure.
So I have one of the slowest connections in the country.
Yeah.
And I do pretty good with it. If you're trying to do a really twitchy game like a first person shooter,
sure,
you're going to want to have more than that to really get the detail through. But I was playing Skyrim Special Edition on full settings.
Nice.
And it was amazing. I'm playing on my old 2012 Mac and I'm playing Skyrim on full settings. It's pretty fantastic.
That's one thing that's really cool is there's a ton of games that Mac users have missed out on that this will allow them to play those games. So
I'm a Mac user, but
I'm sorry.
I don't play any. I wouldn't even know how to go about playing a game on my PC anymore.
Yeah.
At this point, though, you just got to dual boot your system.
Exactly. Well, and I'm at the point now where like I'm trying to like wean myself off of Windows and just go straight Linux, just because this is a nice tangent, but Windows 10 is ruining me for Windows. So it's just, as a developer and IT background person, I just cannot stand Windows 10. So.
What is it about it that's grinding your gears?
Well, the biggest thing is just some of the security control that you don't have control of, and then like the updates that you have to take. And we had an issue at our church where it tried to update when. So if it's got power, it will turn itself on to update or whatever. You can't turn it off. You can only schedule it, but you can't set like certain times or whatever. And then what happened was it was like, okay, well, I need to update now because I can't turn it off. So it updated during a storm. And during that storm, we lost power and it crashed our kernel. So we had to rebuild Windows for that. And so that was a fun, like I'm doing this as a volunteer for our church, and now I'm doing it more as a full-time job for our church. And so things like that nature. And some of the practices that they're doing is because they need to protect themselves too. So a good example is my brother-in-law was building his own computer. And what we did was we took a computer that I had already built for their family, and then we just upgraded it. Well, Windows 10 deauthenticated itself because it detected the new motherboard and assumed it was on a new computer.
Oh, okay.
And there's nowhere in there that's like, oh, hey, you got new hardware. Let's update your registry or whatever. Instead, it deauthenticated itself. And my father-in-law called Microsoft support to be like, hey, we purchased this is ours. And he was like, oh, well, you need to upgrade to Windows Ultimate or whatever. They're going to charge him like $300 for that key or whatever, when it took me a ton of Googling to find out that there is a link within Windows 10 that you can click on that says, I just replaced this, re-authenticate yourself essentially. And like he almost spent $300 to get that computer going. It was like, we shouldn't have to do that. So there's some of that kind of practice stuff that bothers me. And then some of the lack of control that they're taking from the software, that kind of games as a service mentality. So
I spent $300 on a drone a few Black Fridays ago. And recently I was at my in-laws' place, and they live along a river, and then they've got a pond, like a private pond. And so I was getting this cool aerial view of the pond, and then all of a sudden I bought the controller for it, and I put my phone into it. It says like force update. And so they forced an update to the drone, and so I watched it from probably like 80 feet in the air, just like stop and come rifling down and landed smack dab in the middle of the pond. Gone. It's gone. Yeah. It's now a habitat for a turtle.
It's still down there.
It's part of the coral reef somewhere.
And I couldn't believe it, and I got an email immediately from their company saying like, hey, you can't turn off your drone in the middle of an update. And I said, I didn't turn anything off, bro.
Hey, you can't update my drone in the middle of it droning.
Yeah, right, I was like, so I'd like my $300 back, and then I haven't heard back from them.
Of course not.
At all.
Of course not.
That's what happens when you're an early adopter, JJ.
I know, but the drone footage was so good. My favorite was to fly it and wave at the drone. So I have a ton of footage of me waving at my own drone.
My desire is to eventually own my own property and then have a VR headset that's connected to like an army of drones that anytime I need to check the property, I just send them out, and then my eyes are all over and I can see, what are the cows doing right now?
Right.
I would have cows too.
All the drones are hooked up with like tasers.
Yo, yeah. Oh, wouldn't that be the
Shadowrun is now, man.
Right.
I just watched a viral video of a guy, I think he was in Mexico City, and he was living in an apartment, and there's this really loud street party going on, like at 3 a.m.
I've seen this
Couldn't get
video.
him dispersed, so he attached a Roman candle to a drone and lit the Roman candle, and then flew the drone around and just fired into his street party and totally dispersed.
It was amazing. Like, that video is amazing.
When drones started getting really popular, I remember the one that went to the Renaissance fair or whatever, and there's an actual guy
javelin
through. Yeah.
What is this magic?
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap this thing up, if people want to come check out Replay Games when they're in Fargo, ND, what are your hours?
So Tuesday through Thursday, we're 2 to 10 p.m. Friday, Saturday, till midnight, and then Saturday we start early at noon. Until Labor Day, we're opening at noon for those days, and then Sunday, Monday is my weekend, so we're closed those days. And then we're just downtown next to JL Beers. So
awesome, yeah, it's a super convenient, and the air conditioning is top notch.
Yes, we got. When we were looking for a place to make our home, basically one of the biggest requirements was AC because boys are stinky. So
yeah,
I'm one of them. So
well, and you get enough TVs and consoles running at the same time where it's like we know it's going to be about 10 degrees warmer than anything. So no, it's awesome stuff. I think it's really, really cool, and congratulations. Things seem to be going pretty well.
It's going really well. I mean, we're at the point where it mostly covers its own expenses, and then it doesn't pay me a salary yet. It was the hardest part, but no, it's great to see the community we've built around it already, and the response we've gotten from that. So it's fun to see new faces that come check out a game that they never played before. We joke a lot that we offer that common ground for families where mom and dad gamed growing up, and the kids are just getting into it. Well, they come here for that common ground, and what do? The kids go to play Fortnite, and the parents are playing old Mario. So, but that's really fun to see. So,
well, let's get Buckner and Garcia here to do a concert with all of their old video game songs, and I think that'd be a blast and a half. All right, well, we'll log on and we'll find you. Do you got Facebook presence?
Yep,
what about other
social media? All the social media, and then www.replaygames.us is our website, which we have all of our games listed for sale through the online store link, as well as the games that are ready to play through the arcade catalog link. So,
if someone wants a game, do you guys ever accept I've been looking for this for years to keep my name on the list?
We got a list of things to look out for, and then we can also, I have multiple vendors so back to the Take-Two days, I did a lot of eBay selling as well, so I'd buy and sell, and so I got a lot of vendors that I had in contacts I can check to see if they got anything that I can get for a reasonable price to, consignment sell it to a customer, so...
Okay, well, remember, I need that $20, so find a way to sell this Madden 07.
But
thanks, CJ.
I was going to say, I specifically wore my mustard shirt for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's that's the seat I was in when I almost Ralphed.
Nice.
Well, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you down at Replay Games.
All right.
A huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring this podcast. Folks, if you're looking to buy or sell a home, contact Natalie Deutsch today, because Natalie Deutsch is not only a previous podcast guest, she's somebody who's going to care enough to sell your property for top dollar. She's also going to find you the best price possible if you're purchasing a new home. Last year, on average, Natalie earned her clients $4,000 over list price on their homes and sold them faster than the market average. On average, Natalie's selling a home every 3.74 days. That's 2 homes a week. Those numbers don't lie. Find out why Natalie is one of the top agents in this entire market. Get a hold of her today, Natalie at hatchrealtyfm.com. You can also call 701-388-9338 or go on to livefargomorehead.com. That's livefargomorehead.com. Read all of her amazing reviews, and then listen to her episode of JJ Meets World. Thanks again to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode of JJ Meets World and would like to help us continue to produce 2 new episodes every week, you can donate to our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/JJ Meets World and donate today. Even as little as $1 a month can go a long way. Visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, go to linebenders.com, and you can find direct contact info for JJ. The thing I liked about old school video games was you could play them buck naked, and the only person who would know would be you. That's what I miss.